attorneys.
Do you need any other attorney though?
No, man, I'm telling you. They said the best we got. That's all we need.
Is that on the record?
Thank you. All right, I'd like to call this board meeting for Monday, July 13th to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Ballard,
Here.
Ms. Nazario,
Here.
Ms. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Sturgill, here, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Here.
Pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Recognition of visitors, seeing none. We would have the first hearing of the public. And because we are in this COVID season that we're in, we did give the public an opportunity to send their messages in online or their questions in online. And because there's a whole stack of them, there's lots of them. So what we're going to do is post the questions on our website with the thoughtful answers after we sit down and go through them and let our CEO and myself answer the questions to the best of our ability. And most of those questions are really leaning toward how we're going to open up schools coming into this new school year. So seeing none of the public here with questions, we will move on to approval of the minutes from, let me see, one of those. I don't have any unimproved minutes here. Seeing none, we'll go right to the next old business. Seeing no old business. You guys have anything for old business? Nothing? Okay. We're down our.
I'm sorry.
Go.
And is Mr. Hawks here?
Yes.
Okay, through the chair and the superintendent, I did receive, at the other previous meetings, we discussed a little bit about the LFI. So is that old business? We discussed LFI monies that were left, and I don't know if it's going to be in the financial report, but it was brought to my attention that Tia has done some work on that, and I think it's to the nature of some approximately 1.3 million in LFI money, and then there were some questions of outstanding bills still left on the high school, and I understand there's a PO out for $200,000, something like that. And I was just wondering that if in the very near future, if we get kind of an itemized thing on that, just in terms of those expenditures. I know we had a certain budget for the school project, and my guess is, and Mr. Hawks can add clarity to this, that there is $200,000 left in outstanding monies in that regard. And then I believe 1.3 million left for us to determine which things that fit into an LFI allowable expenditure. So if anyone could provide any more clarity on that, that would be helpful. Does that sound accurate? Please come on up and have a seat with us so we can hear you and they can hear you in the public.
If you're, Mr. Woods, I quite couldn't hear you all the whole, so, but are you asking about what is left over in the construction budget?
Yeah, Tia, I had a phone conversation,
Right.
and I'm kind of not maybe accurate, but she indicated somewhere in the nature of about $1.3 million in our LFI account, and I think that there was a PO that's out there open for like 200,000.
Correct.
Now that 200,000, those are the final costs for the high school and all the other projects? Or?
It's for the project, yes. Some of that money, I think, is to pay off the Hammond construction and part of the state. We have to finalize. We have not completed the final closing, as you will, of the project. We had started that at one time, and then the state had stopped. And of course, then we had the COVID. That process takes approximately 1 year to actually close the books.
Okay.
And by meaning closing the books, the state does it all in conjunction with myself and the treasurer's office. And we would meet, monthly or what have you. But that process will take about a year.
Okay, and that's where that $200,000, so are we safe to assume that of all the costs that are outstanding there, it'll fit within that $200,000 PO?
I would say no. I think once we finalize everything, I personally would not want to recommend saying that 200,000, after what's left, that 200,000 is our 19%, because we got to remember the state funded 80% and we funded 19 through our bond issue from 2000. So I think when the books are closed, the 19% that is ours, the language in the voting ballot was either that money went into the maintenance fund or went back to paying off the bonds.
So that would be of that 200,000, because I also thought that the language was, we placed our 19% in the bank. So the only money that has drawn interest would be our.
Right, but the state may say that interest, I believe the language, the law states any interest on the money that they could also take their 80% of that. So
that would defeat the whole idea of spending our money last to put it in the bank to draw the interest.
yeah, but most of the LFI money is ours that we have put into the STAR account and things of that nature through TNI. Yeah, but I personally don't want to say that 200,000 is for us, total. I mean, to pay off the end of it, and then what's left, we still have to close the book.
Right. So, and I guess for my clarity, we're talking about two different pots of money, right?
Correct.
The $200,000. So let's say we have $150,000 in outstanding bills. That last 50,000 arguably is 19% ours. The rest, 81% the state's.
Correct.
The LFI money on the other side, that 1.3 million, is all of ours for LFI expenditures.
I would say majority, 99.9% of it's ours, but
Okay.
I just want to make sure the books are closed. Yes.
Right. And then if possible, and I know it's going to take a certain amount of time to do the actual closing, but if we could have clarity, I think the monies that are outstanding is a finite amount, and it's attached to some kind of a service or a product that we've purchased or we've received, but not paid for yet.
Absolutely.
So I think it would be very helpful that we would have that itemized thing. Okay, so of what's left, we owe this much for that, this much for that. And then also, if we could, through the superintendent or yourself, inquire to the state what their expectations are in terms of how we, since we know this money is there, and if there's an issue with it, we want to know what that is now. Because I think what we should be doing is looking at things that might link to it could be an LFI expenditure that we need to discuss. And I think maybe the best time to discuss those things is while the other thing isn't closed yet.
Sure.
So as it relates to this project, so we've had a lot of time go by. And of course, there were some things that happened. And quite honestly, we were very, I think, happily surprised that the LFI money hadn't been spent over the last 3 years.
Correct.
So, and I know there were some projects that we talked about. There were some different things. So we should probably begin to reassess that. And then I know that there are things that you thought were things that we should be doing that we need in place. So we need to have some recommendations, and we should probably start a process for how we deal with that. Now, another part of it is the Bond Oversight Committee still in existence, and do we need to have them engaged as we make decisions or recommendations about what we like to do with the LFI money and those kind of things?
Yeah, anytime we would go to use the LFI money, we would have to get the Bond Oversight Committee back together and just keep them, up to date what we're doing. I would say, yes, that would be a great idea.
It'd probably be a good idea to begin to organize those folks, because even with the stuff we're talking about now, this should be the topic of conversation for them. Usually we would get reports from that oversight committee on the expenditure process, the the state of the project, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're kind of discussing things that probably were things that when they existed, they would have been discussing.
Yes, sir.
So with superintendent, however you guys do that, we should probably, that way, it's kind of like not our money to spend. It's not general fund money. And the only expenditure in the process included that bond oversight committee. So even as we're having these discussions and conversations, they probably should be part of that process.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I've got a question. Didn't we have a meeting where we got an update from the Bond Oversight Committee? And didn't they kind of disband at that point? Didn't they disband, Jeff?
No, they didn't disband. We put it on hold until end of the project. And when we start closing the books, we would bring everybody back together, or as the request of Mr. Williams.
Thanks, because I don't remember, it was so long ago.
But yes, it has been some time there, Mr. Sturgill.
And Bill, you sat on that committee, didn't you?
Yeah, I remember her giving a report, and
Right.
that was what I thought was the last of it, but I guess, and things happen, maybe I was wrong, okay, but I mean, I'm sure they're all still living, so.
Great. Any further? Hearing none, we will now go on to the report and recommendations of the treasurer. Now, we do have a presentation from the treasurer, but before we start the presentation, and I'm not sure who's the starter of the presentation, but the first subject is 8.01, consider approval of the second resolution declaring it necessary to renew an existing 23.85 mil tax levy. So we have a resolution before us. We've already passed the first phase. We need the second phase so we can go on the ballot for November the 3rd. The resolution reads as such: a resolution submitting to the electors of the school district the question of the renewal of an existing 23.85 mil tax levy for the purpose of current expenses pursuant to section 5705-21 of the revised code.
Motion to approve item 8.01.
We have a motion to approve. Support?
Second.
Support. Roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Ballard,
Yes.
Ms. Nazario,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill, yes. Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Resolution passes. And now, do we have anyone that's ready to start the presentation from our
Did that wrong.
treasurer? What do you say, my friend? I thought you said something, Bill. I'm sorry. I thought you said something to me. So we've asked him to put a presentation together of our 5-year forecast and just an overview of the district.
On your screen, you'll see a comparison from October 29's forecast with the current May 2020 update. We'll start with the revenue portion. Looking at section 1.01 of the May update, which is general property taxes, this makes up about 16% of our revenue. Property real estate tax revenues are realized by a school district by the assessed valuation of real property located within the district. Real estate collection estimates are communicated to the school district by the Lorain County Auditor. In fiscal years 21 through 24, it is assumed that the real estate revenues will decrease based on delinquencies in payment and the expiration of the 23.85 mil levy. Revenue from the assumption that the renewal levy is passed is added back into the forecast on line 11.02, which you'll see later. Line 1.035, unrestricted grants, which makes up 71% of our revenue. Governor DeWine announced in May that the state would be cutting 21% of our remaining state funding amounts that were due to districts through the foundation. For our district, that would have been a loss of over $3 million. But due to our poverty rate in our district and the district's reliance on state funding, our loss of funding was capped at just under $945,000. This is not reflected in the forecast due to the timing of when I completed the forecast versus the timing of the governor's announcement. Moving forward, I anticipate a loss of about $945,000 from the state aid for the next 2 years. Line 1.04, restricted grants, which makes up about 7% of our revenue. This line is comprised of catastrophic reimbursement, economically disadvantaged, and career tech funding. No increase is assumed for fiscal years 21 through 24. Line 1.05, property tax allocations, which is about 2% of our revenue. This category represents the homestead and rollback revenue the district receives from the state of Ohio. This line has a direct correlation to the general property tax line. This is the 12.5% reimbursement that the state gives the district to make up for the taxpayer discount revenue. No increase is assumed for fiscal years 21 through fiscal year 24. Line 1.06, all other revenue, which makes up about 2% of our revenue. There's about a $326,000 drop from last year's actuals for fiscal year 20 due to the Medicaid reimbursement and the tuition revenue decreasing. For fiscal years 21 through 24, the continued decrease is tied directly to the decreasing enrollment numbers. It is also tied to the interest earnings since our cash balance available for investment decreases over the life of the forecast. Moving on to expenditures. Again, I have the October 29 forecast and the May update for comparison. They're on separate pages because of how large the sections are. Looking at line 3.01 of the May update, personnel services, which makes up about 22% of our expenses. You'll notice a substantial increase to this line beginning in fiscal 21. This is because the district will no longer be using the school-wide pooling funding model and will be returning to the more traditional funding model. Our salaries and wages will now be reflected in this line instead of being so greatly split between this line and line 5.01, which is labeled as operating transfers out. I assume a 3 to 4% increase to this line for each year through fiscal year 24. Line 3.02, employees' retirement and insurance benefits, which makes up about 9% of our expenses. The increases in this line are directly related to personnel services and tied to no longer using the school-wide pooling funding structure. Line 3.03, purchase services, which is about 64% of our expenses. I assume about a 4% increase based on trending each year through fiscal year 24 for items such as utilities, printing, postage, legal services, meeting and conferences, student transportation, costs associated with our students being open enrolled to other districts, and other miscellaneous purchases and expenses. Line 3.04, supplies and material. There's an initial increase due to some instructional materials returning to the general fund from the school-wide pool. Based on trending, I anticipate a 1% increase each year thereafter. Large technology purchases will be paid for with grant funding. Line 3.05, capital outlay. I kept that flat throughout the forecast. This line captures technical equipment and capital fixed assets that cost greater than $5,000 per item. It also includes costs for land, existing buildings, equipment, vehicles, and other fixed assets. Line 4.30, other object costs. This line captures expenses not otherwise classified, such as audit fees, bank charges, liability insurance, tax collection fees from the Lorain County Auditor, and other fees and dues. On to the next slide. I want to take a quick minute to talk about the CARES Act funding. We will be losing a total of almost $1.9 million due to the state cuts to the foundation payments because of the pandemic. We will be receiving $3.9 million from the CARES Act fund. The CARES Act funding will help us cover our losses as well as pay for additional costs related to the pandemic. Examples of additional costs include materials and postage for curriculum that might be mailed to students, additional cleaning supplies and equipment, PPE, personal protective equipment such as masks, and technology for students and staff to be able to work and learn remotely. On to the next slide. This slide shows the comparison of what our fund balances will look like without the levy renewal and with the levy renewal. On line 10.1, this is the forecasted fund balances if the renewal levy is not passed. You'll see that in fiscal year 24, we would reach a negative $53 million balance. On line 12.01, this is our forecasted fund balances if the renewal levy is passed, which would leave us at a negative $43 million fund balance at the end of fiscal year 24. In closing, the main purpose of the May forecast is to update the current year actuals, update next year's budgets, and to trend future years based on new information. But we are in unprecedented times with this pandemic, and our numbers may fluctuate by the time we get to November's forecast. Even without the additional spending for costs related to the coronavirus, the district's ending cash balance is expected to decline each fiscal year. As mentioned, the district has a 5-year, $23.85 mil operating expense levy, expiring at the end of December 2021. If this levy is not renewed, our district will lose almost $10 million a year in revenue. This will financially devastate our district beginning in fiscal year 22-23.
Thank you. Among ourselves, we could probably get to you on the phone if you guys have any questions for her. I think this has already been posted and accepted down at the ODE, so it is on the state's website already. Anything further?
Yes, so I guess it's in anticipation, because we know we have, of course, this major levy initiative coming up. And based on, and maybe Jeff can give some insight, based on the forecast with the comparisons with and without the levy, we know we have to pass this renewal. And then is it in year 2021, we would be looking at, please.
If I can finish your question. I think the
Please
question
finish
is,
it up. And
is my mic on? In the year 2021 would be the latest year we go back for new money. That's correct.
so, typically we have 3 opportunities.
Correct.
We're gonna have to really mobilize folks because we need to pass this thing our first time out now. And I think, I don't know if the levy committee is fully aware and engaged, and how do we engage that group of people in this environment. So I think a lot of thought and insight, communication around
Yeah,
that.
the levy committee's ready to go. This is a renewal. Okay, and we've had very good success with renewals. Okay, but I've been talking to Bambi pretty regular, and we'll be ready to run it. She'll be contacting Jeff. We'll be ready to run the levy if we can get it on in November.
I think based on what we did tonight, it will be on in November, but I do believe that this November is going to be a very special kind of November because we're not sure if we're going to the polls or not. So we're going to have to really get behind this and really push all of our people who are early voting and absentee voting to make sure they look out for their schools. Jeff, did you have something else?
Yeah, I agree completely. And first of all, Bambi's already reached out, and I'll give her a call on the way home. So we'll be locked up. But I do agree with Mr. Ballard that there's a lot more to it this year. I was part of a levy campaign in March when the rules changed midstream, and it was very different. Instead of building a campaign to peak at one time, you have to sustain momentum over a very long period of time. And it's a different type of challenge, especially in a climate where even when you take obviously a lot of political issues out there, the presidential campaign this year, and with COVID and with racial injustice and all the economy, it's hard to get our message out there. So again, we need a very unique approach to communicating with our community.
And it's usually in the past, it seems that, we have this kind of a curve in terms of our activity of the levy. And a lot of the energy would kind of default towards that season just before we went to the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the early voting and the mail-in voting, our campaign is going to have to start so much earlier because, I don't know, when does the first mail out go? I mean, have they given us that kind of guidance yet from the Secretary of State in terms of when voting we've done a mail-in voting this past time. Do they have any guidance on when that's going to begin? Because that's going to be really different for us in terms of how we use our levy energy.
I'm looking around the room and no one's making eye contact. So I've not heard anything, and I'm assuming no one else has either.
Yeah, the answer is no. They've not made any final decisions. I think the Board of Elections and the Secretary of State are getting direction on a daily basis, and it's a moving target. And we're, my only suggestion is going to be everybody, please apply for an absentee ballot. So if anything does happen different in November, you already have what you have. But we do not know. At the national level, they're trying to deter people from absentee ballots, and they want people to have to go to the polls. But our governor and our Secretary of State have all said that this is what we've been doing in Ohio, and they intend to continue that and expand it even further this year.
And especially considering what we did this past cycle.
Yes.
To think that we're not going to at least do that would be naive. So I think, so I don't know, Aaron, you guys just did a campaign where you had to deal with those specific dynamics, which gives us a little bit of an advantage. But how all of our levy personnel, all the folks who are used to doing this work, it's a completely different thing than they normally think about. So we have our instincts in terms of how we campaign. Well, this is not going to be compliant with our instinctive behavior.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you.
Nothing else from the treasurer. So our next portion will be report from the CEO. And before we hand the mic over to our CEO, this is the first time you've been here, I guess, through an official board meeting, and we'd like to thank you and welcome you home. Welcome you back, and thank you so much for being here at our board meetings. And it's refreshing to see all the information being disseminated to everyone all at the same time. So again, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here, and hope you're here for a very long time.
That's the plan. So again, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to all that comes next. Very, very excited. And who's projecting? Are we doing that? While we're setting up our presentation, and I need to talk about mask off. Mm-hmm. And by the way, just an opportunity to educate. And Dave Koval has been fantastic. He's our health commissioner, and he's been excellent. Meet with him every Friday with a group of superintendents in Lorain County. He's done a phenomenal job of holding our hands and walking us through a lot of uncharted waters. But again, no one truly knows what's going on, but his very science-based approach, but also very caring and understanding of the people that we serve. The way he described it is that when I have a mask on, that's one barrier. And when someone else has a mask on, that's two barriers. when there's 6 feet between us, that's a third barrier. And he said we need to be careful to at all times have at least one barrier. So again, I feel safe taking my mask off, and I'm demonstrating appropriate social distancing. But what I talked to you about and kind of lead off our conversation here, and I hope that as we go through the presentation tonight, you'll see one thing, but I hope you see it grow as we move on. And what I mean by that is the team. The goal is to present these. We have 12, 16, 17 people working online, and I'm pointing to my computer because that's how we meet nowadays. And we all work together very collaboratively. We all share ideas, bounce things off each other. We create a safe place, make ourselves vulnerable, and we're learning together. And what I hope you all see as we move through this process is all of them in the room, and we're all presenting together because we want to model healthy behavior. And so what we're going to do tonight is we just have 3 of us here, me, Michael, and Aaron. And by the way, I do want to introduce our new Assistant Superintendent of School Improvement, Michael Scott. Familiar face when he's not wearing that thing on it, but he's been around for a while. And
Congratulations, and welcome.
yep, we're talking before, there's a core of people we have in our district. You want to rebuild a school district and create one, these are the folks that we have. So very excited about the team we have. So what we did is we've been meeting, and one of the questions I get a lot, Jeff, is, okay, what's happening? Are we going to delay school? Or what's our plan look like? And the reality is we don't have that answer yet. Our goal right now is to listen, learn, and then react and lead appropriately. So when people ask what the plan is, currently the plan is a plan to get a plan. And what we need now is information. We need to listen to our staff. We need to listen to our community and hear what their concerns are. And we'll share some of that tonight. The staff survey is still ongoing, but pretty much ended, theoretically supposed to end on Friday. And the community survey, goes till Wednesday. And our staff survey, and I think we have 1,193 staff members, we have about 900 respondents, which is amazing at any time, let alone the middle of July. And we have some very good information. Along with that information is they're sharing what their concerns are. But you can't build a plan around concerns. You can't build a plan around questions. So the concerns guide us to the next round of questions, and will come out in the form of surveys and focus groups to find out why people feel the way they do. And then we can determine from the needs, we find out what's impacting those things and create a needs assessment, and then we will create plans accordingly. So it sounds like a long way, and we see the diagram that Aaron put together. It looks pretty complex, and it is. But I think it's critical that we take each step with intention, with purpose, and that we go to the next step being fully informed, as opposed to trying to guess what the best solution is. And we also know that the rules are going to change daily. Our goal is to share with the entire community exactly where we are at every minute. Excuse me. And our ultimate goal is to identify the needs of the children we serve and meet those needs while keeping our staff safe. And what we're doing here is we'll outline some of those very first steps to discuss what we're doing. So we'll go next one.
Okay, so test.
We're good.
Okay. So we have 14 phases to getting us to being able to phase in and open school. The 15th step being course correct along the way. Because once we do restart, and I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna take this down for just a second. We are going to course correct because we have to be flexible with our approach because there's a lot of unknown conditions that could be coming our way. So this first slide gives you an idea of our process map. So there's 14 steps plus a 15th, and we're gonna walk through each step of what we've done so far, and then those next steps to give a clear picture that we are forming a plan to make a plan, and then we'll get feedback along the way, every step of the way. But the most important thing is to realize it takes a village to make this plan. We are working collaboratively together to really make sure that all voices are heard. Dr. Graham alluded to the importance of the surveys, and we're going to showcase what we've learned from those surveys from a staff perspective. Then we'll be getting together real soon to talk about what our families have shared with us as well.
And I think what I hope you also notice, even with just 3 of us in the room, we're going to jump in and piggyback on each other. And as the room gets more and more crowded with our leadership team, and again, our leadership team includes members of our staff, support staff, teaching staff, administrative team. But we'll see as people chipping in together to demonstrate that we work as a team on these things.
And just so you know, we also have 17 folks or so that are tuning in, and they will be sending me updates to say, hey, you forgot to say this, because that may inevitably happen.
That is the deal we struck for tonight. So if we're staring at our phones, that's why. We're getting feedback to make sure we don't misstep.
So the first step was to form a leadership team. We needed to have a place where we could begin, where we could learn where we ended our school year, and then start thinking about how do we prepare for the next school year that's to come. And in the room when it happened were various union, yeah, Aaron, I see you laughing at me over there. Various union leadership from the LEA to the LAA to all our support staff union leadership. We have representatives from curriculum and instruction, the family office, finance, health and wellness, human resources, operations, student services, and technology. And you can see the names that go along with that. I won't exhaust that, but those are there as well. But the idea was, let's get as much of our organization at the table to really just talk about where we were, where we need to go, and how we're going to get there. So this group established some commitments. And the first commitment being to communicate progress every step of the way. The second commitment was to include stakeholders throughout our process. Our third commitment was to be transparent with the data we collect. And then last but not least, form our plan around the needs of our students, staff, and family. Those are a collective approach. And once again, all needs matter in this approach that we're having to build our plan. But we will be transparent with the data. That's coming a little bit later. As we collect it, you'll see it, you'll hear it. We want to include various stakeholders. So as we get through different parts of the plan, people will be invited to join the table. When we get to the point where it's time to roll out a plan or plans, we want focus groups. We want people to experience that plan ahead of time. Let us know if we're on the right track, and then we can course correct before we officially roll out any plan. So there's going to be lots of opportunity to hear concerns, to vet plans, and to make sure that we are considering safety at all costs.
And just for full disclosure, there was also some internal debate about these commitments, because if you look at most of those, 3 of those, by information we receive tomorrow, they could all be different. So the progress we've made may be irrelevant. The transparent piece, information we've shared and data we've shared may be irrelevant. The plan that we create may be irrelevant because as the rules change, we have to adapt. So again, by sharing our message, we just hope that everyone understands that everything we say is a draft model, because we learn more and more every day. But we thought it's more important to be open and honest about exactly where we are, as opposed to hiding up in the room where it happens and unveiling something at a later date.
The next step 2, initial questions we needed to pursue. We had to think of what information must we gather and how are we going to do it. So the initial questions that our think tank group came up with were, how are our staff and families during this unprecedented time? We need to know how people are doing. And there's a lot of work that's being done right now. Is it reaching everybody? So our personal outreach was just that, to find out how people are doing and if there's areas in which we can all collectively help. Do we have updated contact information? One of the things that as our staff are making phone calls right now, what we're finding out is we're getting some calls that are the wrong number. So we've asked through our social media, through our website, please let us know updated contact information. If your address has changed, we found out in a survey, 10% of people have moved. We need those updated contact information regarding where you're living so that we can make sure we're getting all information to you in a manner in which is best for you. Our basic needs being met. Jeff Karuski, sorry, Jeff, you're gonna get me on that later. I've been doing that for weeks now. Is doing a great job of helping coordinate these processes, but we need to know, is this working for everyone, and where isn't it, and where is it working, and what can we do differently if need be? Do we have access to the internet and technology to facilitate remote learning? That's a huge one, right? We need to make sure if we are in a remote experience to start the school year, that everybody has what they need in order to participate. The way we end it cannot be the way we start. So we needed to gather information around that. And then what concerns do you have returning to school? We had open-ended questions just to get that information, because everything that we ask may not cover all the needs. So we wanted to make sure that in our survey questions for staff and families, that we provided open-ended questions so that people could tell us exactly what's going on relative to their concerns. And then in our various groups that we'll talk about, our work groups can then begin to address those concerns. We've had thousands of comments come in, and every comment is read, and every comment is respected. And we're trying to look for trends so we can address trends. But then when there are particular things for a staff member or for a family, that we can directly address those particular concerns as well.
And when I say read, not just skimmed, they're actually cut and pasted into certain categories to help us aggregate the data. So again, we've gone through every piece to make sure that we understand the common themes that the data is showing.
So step 3 was to develop staff and family surveys. So we came up with these questions. Now, what do the surveys look like? And you've seen them, but our staff survey was Open with Care survey, and it ran from July 1st through July 8th. We've had 888 participants as of today. That analysis has been in process. We continue every day to read comments, to just make sure that as things change, people also have a way of getting their updated feelings. That's an important piece. Day by day, week by week, more information changes. So how I responded to a survey a week ago may not be exactly how I feel right now. So we have to be open to hearing how people's opinions are changing as well. The family survey opened up last week, and it's running through Wednesday, as Dr. Graham had indicated. We have staff members that are making personalized phone calls, picking up that phone every single day and calling. If they get a voicemail, they're calling the next day to try to outreach. But in addition to that, we have an online survey. So when we are getting voicemails, we're encouraging people to go online through all of our social media platforms and our website. That website has been posted in English and Spanish so that our families can engage. And as of date, we've had 763 families do the survey. We've reached out to 4,281 phone numbers. And then from a Spanish survey online, we've had 76. So we are reaching an outreach to a lot of people, and we're gathering a lot of information. The next phase is to analyze that once all that information has, that window has been closed. And we'll go through the exact same process that we went through in disaggregating the staff survey.
Can you guys hear me if I make an addition to that? The emphasis.
I don't think they can hear you on the television though, so you can grab that microphone on the computer?
Is this live?
It should be. Yes, it's live.
Oh, she is. Yeah, I have this right here. I've got like a karaoke microphone.
If you want to sing, I would appreciate it. And
I want to.
encourage it.
The approach of the group has been very focused on making sure that the outreach is personal, so that it's not this just cold tallying of data, but that it is a caring person within our school system reaching out to a family and students who they know, so that we can not only encourage that feedback, but to remind folks, like, we're thinking about you. We care about what's happening to you right now, and we are creating a personalized approach for you. So that's what has really impressed me about our team in terms of thought process and just making sure that it's about people.
Absolutely. And this just in, so live information, Jeff Karuski said, "Don't mess up my name again." And his next point was, no, I'm joking there. His next point was to mention the helpline. So Erin, if you want to speak to the helpline that has been established, that'd be great as well.
Sure. And you did a great, thank you for going over all the different ways that we are doing this outreach and to make it easy for people to provide their input. But the helpline was put in place. There's a number that folks can call in English, and that's 830-HELP-4357. Or they can call the Linea Español to be able to speak to somebody who speaks Spanish. And we're getting folks calling in, like, say you're a grandmother and you have, 5 kids who are in your care and you don't have a computer. This is the number that you can call to speak to a person, and they will enter your data for you. And they will also listen to your concerns and make sure that if you have any needs, if you're having issues getting meals, if you are in need of crisis intervention in your home, we will get those services to you. So again, it's a way of having personalized contact with people who can assist.
And Bill Oley was in the room today when we were having our planning meeting, and he said the phone was ringing off the hook, which is good that people are reaching out and expressing what needs are, and we'll be very responsive to doing that. So the next phase of our plan,
Before you go
Excuse me,
past that slide.
I do have one question.
yes, sir.
When did your survey start?
The staff survey began July 1st and went through the 8th. The family survey began July 6th.
Because I've read so much in the last couple of days where people said if they knew we were going to level 3, their answers would have been very different. Okay, so maybe they still have time to resubmit some.
Absolutely.
You
So
know,
the online survey is available for resubmission. That data will look at the most recent submissions. But also when we've called or people call the hotline, they can express those updated concerns as well. And you're right, we have to be responsive. Things are changing, and they're going to continue to change.
If I can speak to that just a little bit, and again, this is from people who are in the know. The purpose of that system where you change from orange, we went from orange to red, was intended to be only monitored monthly, or monitored constantly, but only changed monthly. And the governor chose to change it weekly. The whole purpose of that is to see whether or not the data that's coming in is trend data or an anomaly. And according to our health commissioner, for us, it was an anomaly. So that's why we're back to orange again already. So the process, and I don't know, I think we're going to meet again to determine how to use that information or how to share that information and how to use that system, because exactly that happened. People panicked, and should they have? I guess we had a weekend with 75 cases, which is not the norm here, and then we dropped back down to 5 and kind of leveled off at the lower number. So I do agree that there's a lot of information out there. There's some misinformation out there. And there's a lot of information that people, all of us, just don't fully understand. So what we're hoping is that we can also be a source for interpreting and translating the data that's out there. But yes, there was a lot of panic as a result of that orange to red maneuver.
So the Ohio Department of Education has released reset and restart guides. Part of our plan was to generate questions from that guide. So we went through a real intentional process of asking our leadership group, what are the main points of the guide? What implications do the main points have for us? What additional questions do we have? So questions beget more questions, and then you get to solutions. So we are in that phase right now. And then how do we need to acquire additional information? So to your point, Coach, when you spoke of information changing, well, how do we make sure that we're getting people's responses to that? And I think we have a pretty good system of allowing people to re-engage with the surveys, re-engage with the helpline, and expressing their concerns, and so we can all gather that information and continue to be responsive. But the plan areas, and this is an exhaustive list, a lot of it is what we do on a day-to-day, but what we know during this time is this is not the normal day-to-day. So what does it look like for technology potentially in 3 to 4 different models? What are the budgetary concerns? And Tia spoke to those a little bit earlier. If we are back in whatever capacity, how do we feed kids with social distancing, with masks, all these pieces? How do we service some of our most vulnerable students that need the supports that we give on a day-to-day? What does that look like in all different forms of a restart? So those are the plan areas, and they were great plan areas, and there's great questions that we need to probe from that document. So we, as a group, began to really break that apart. So as we broke that guide apart, you'll see later, we'll talk about forming work groups, and then how we're gonna take all of those layers of plan areas and give those to different groups and get the task done so that we can have a comprehensive plan moving forward. So step 5, and that's where we are, analyzing the staff survey. So here's some things that we wanted to spotlight from the survey. And at this point that the analysis occurred, we had 865 surveys completed. Some people reached out and said, hey, I didn't have a chance. Can you open the window? And we opened the window. So that's how we reached, I think it was 888. But as you can see, all parts of our organization were a part of the staff survey, from Airmark to building administrators to transportation teachers, and we disaggregated and saw, what were the percentages. So just to give you a snapshot, when we say we asked everyone to complete the survey, we asked everybody to complete the survey.
And I think it's important to share also that what we're seeing here is not participation rates by a cluster group, so not by staffing group, but they did an analysis and they discovered that it's statistically accurate for the percentages of the staff members that we have. So if we have, say, 56% of our staff members who are teachers, that's the percentage who took the survey. So really nice representation so far.
So one of the first questions that we posed in the survey were, do you or anyone that you're living with or caring for meet the CDC criteria as being at increased risk for severe illness due to the effects of COVID-19? Just gonna let
A
that.
very sobering number.
Yeah.
Again, these are our staff members who believe that either they themselves or someone for whom they are a caregiver meet the criteria that CDC has set out as being high risk. It's half our staff.
There's a lot of implications when we start talking about that. One of the things that we were talking about in preparation today, and Carol Gosling, our HR director, is working on getting us some trend data around substitute fill rate for various positions, knowing that those are things that we need to plan for. We also discovered that although we outsource our sub services through WIXC, I believe is the name, that we still should survey or encourage WIXC to complete a survey to know how many subs are actually going to be engaging in substitute work moving forward. These are all elements that we need to take in consideration when we're deciding what is the best way to restart for the school year.
And to interject, so for our folks who are watching remotely right now, this presentation will be shared on the website so that you'll be able to very clearly see all of these numbers and access later. But if it's not, and Joe, I know you do a great job of making sure that it's visible, but this says that 50.8% are in that category.
Thank you. And then our next slide, we asked about concerns about a possible return to school. And the categories were maintaining 6 feet of physical distance, sharing classroom supplies, sanitizing frequently, wearing a mask myself, supporting students to wear a mask, and no concerns at this time. As you can see, there are concerns. But the concerns that stand out are maintaining 6 feet of physical distance and supporting students to wear a mask. 6 feet of physical distance, 85% of our staff had a concern about that, and wearing a mask or supporting students to wear a mask, 78% of our staff had concerns about that. And board members and anyone, if you have any questions along the way or want to engage in dialogue, feel free to jump in. Okay, that's cool. But I can ramble, so jump in.
Well, so one of the things that I guess I had a concern is how do we know the people that are taking a survey really understand what the CDC guidelines are?
So in our survey, we outlined
The guideline, okay.
points of that. So
Very good, thank you.
And in terms of how do we know, there's a policy that's been in place for a while for any time a staff member has a situation in which they need certain accommodations. So they have to provide certain documentation. So there's a process we'll follow to make sure that the people who are high at risk or serve or caregivers for people at high risk, we'll make sure that that's all documented and they're not coming back into buildings and they'll be safe.
That's a question I have. So of that 50-some% that land there, what are the options? Can they determine they don't want to come into work? Are they remote teachers?
The question is, I think if I understood it, a little muffled there.
Oh, sorry.
What do we do with the staff members who are not allowed to come in? And the goal is to engage them remotely, because our goal is to have a traditional approach to school where kids come to school every day. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can't serve the appropriate social distance model and have all of our students back in school. So you have to figure out a way to accomplish that. And even if we could, we do know that there are a whole lot of parents, based on some of the data we saw, aren't going to send their kids anyway. So we know that if we can keep people safe, and again, we can't keep anyone safe during these times, but we can take steps to make sure people are safer. So as long as we can do our best to keep people as safe as possible, have them back in school, we'll also have a certain population of our students who will be learning remotely from home. And we know, and I think it came up earlier, we know every student needs a device. We know that every home needs internet access, and we can do that. But the question is who and how. So those are the pieces we still have to put together.
And then as a follow-up, so let's say the teachers who fit those categories, they have those characteristics, do they have the option, or is it if you fit in this category, you cannot come back?
It's a good question. If I am high at risk, can I still choose to come back? I'm not sure.
Because that creates,
Yeah, because they would, again, in order for us to provide the accommodation, they'd have to let us know. And if they didn't tell us, then we wouldn't know.
And the toughest part of this whole conversation is that there's such a moving target. I mean,
Yes.
2 weeks from now, everything that we say could change based on what the governor demands. So I was trying to let you, because I'm sure some of my questions you're going to get to in your presentations. I don't want to get ahead of us.
But I'm sure not all of them. And again, not only will the responses change for political reasons because the governor said so, but also as we learn more and the science becomes more obvious to us, then obviously our paths change as a result to having more information. So
Correct.
I appreciate the acceptance of the fact we're sharing information based on what we know today that could all change tomorrow.
Absolutely. And we have to have that kind of an open mind so we
Yes.
don't get ourselves boxed in.
Thank you.
So just to kind of highlight what this exercise just was, this is what it's been like for the last few weeks. We start with a topic and we go down different, it's like choosing your own adventure, but then you get to a roadblock. You say, well, now what? Well, we need to gather more information. How do we gather that information? And then we seek and we network with other districts, and everyone has the people that they're reaching out to, and we're listening. So listening, learning, and then leading is kind of our approach. But we have to have these type of conversations in order to do that efficiently and appropriately.
This is also why we have placed such an emphasis on and have been urging families and staff members to keep their contact information updated with us. Because, okay, so we're educating now on where things are. We might be re-educating on the new plan, in a couple of weeks. So we really appreciate everybody who has taken the time to give us their updated phone number, cell phone number, text number, email. It's really been a big help. It'll be critical in the weeks to come.
And while we are collecting information and learning, there's a lot of things that are going on right now from an operational standpoint in regards to preparing for sanitation, increasing some of those shields and safety pieces. And we'll be able to talk about that a lot more. There's a long list of things that are being done to prepare our buildings right now. And that will be communicated as we develop the plan further and further. And this just in via text, that understanding specific safeguards hopefully will, put as much ease as you can in this type of situation, right? Just to let people know, these are the things that we are doing in order to try to create the most safe environment that we can, knowing that there's still risk. So let me sure where we are. All right.
Yeah, is this the right slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next series of questions: what might prevent you from coming to school in the fall? And this, once again, this is from a staff perspective, but we also ask this, there's a question very similar in the family side. So if you look here, all of the numbers are concerning, to be honest. When we look at and we see 23%, well, it's almost 25%, it's 1 in 4. People say from a student in the district test positive, a staff member in the district test positive, I'm concerned, and 1 in 4 are concerned, but then the closer it gets to where I work on a daily, the more my concerns are, which is logical, but we needed to make sure that we understood that we asked those questions. So as you can see, a student in the building test positive, increase goes up. Another staff member in the building test, it increases. A student in your particular class, it definitely gets higher. And then a staff member that I team work with very closely, then it's really high. Our next series of questions were about online meeting tool preferences, some instructional technology pieces. And before going into the details here, I think it's important that we also take time to reflect on how we went into remote learning last year. It came very quickly. We are where we are. We were where we were, I should say. And we put together a plan to get learning into the hands of students with the time frame that we had. And different parts of our learning community were at different stages in regards to what that would look like. Pre-K through 8, I think, believe me, were primarily packets. And then there were hybrids of things going on at the high school. So when we look at these responses, keep that in mind too. And one of the things that we've been talking about is that we can put a magnifying glass on a lot of practices and be better coming forward. So even the questions that we're asking now, there is no shame or blame in looking at this data. It's about how do we get ourselves better? How do we put in processes so we can get to some decision-making on how we communicate if we are in a remote, or even moving forward. Blended learning is an approach that we may want to consider outside of COVID, outside of pandemic, but what tools do we need? What learning do we have to provide for our staff, by our staff, to be as efficient as possible? So I wanted to preface that before we look at the data as well, that we collect data not to shame or blame, but to paint a reality of where we are, and then establish mechanisms so that we can address what the data says. So we asked teachers, and we have primarily, and all staff, this is all staff responding to the survey as well. So keep that lens in mind as well. We asked, about Zoom and about Google Meet and preferences. And the categories were not at all. I have not experienced it at all. I've only heard of it. I've used it, but had some problems. I'm proficient with it. I can teach others how to use it. So we looked at that, and the data is pretty self-explanatory there. People have used, more proficient with Zoom. Well, we've used Zoom more as a district, so that's not surprising at all. But as we look at Google Classroom as a platform to build lessons on, we asked about Google Meet because that's already embedded in what we do, and there's no additional costs there. So we asked, we'll continue to learn more. That's where focus group conversations will come and play. But what I want to highlight here additionally is I can teach others how to use it. When we talk about professional learning moving forward, we really need to capture and capitalize on the experts that we have in our district, and we have experts. So if we can learn from each other, there's more, we build a greater sense of efficacy. If we can build a greater sense of efficacy, we build a better environment around trust. If we build a better environment of trust, people do more, and there we have it, right? So we're looking at those, and we'll be reaching out and saying, hey, if you indicated that you can teach this to others, let's talk about what that looks like. So the next area, we wanted to know how people were communicating with families and their preferences. So Remind is a two-way communication, and Class Dojo is a two-way communication tool. And we wanted, and Class Dojo, I think, is more elementary focused, and Remind is more secondary focused. So we asked, what are people, we want to know, who can teach others how to use it? Same thing. Are you proficient? Have you had troubles? Have you only heard of it, or not at all? And we asked our entire staff this question because we all should be communicating. Or if I'm at the grocery store and someone asks, well, how's the district communicating? If we can all respond to that collectively, we're better off as an organization. So that's why we did pose these questions to everyone and didn't differentiate between, okay, here's some questions for you teachers. Here's some questions for, we're gonna ask everyone all the questions.
I just want to echo that. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge that all staff should be communicating with families. But traditionally and typically and historically, for example, our food service people don't reach out to our children at home. They don't do Google Classroom necessarily. Our bus drivers are. So because our numbers are what they are, that's not a testimony of the fact that we're not doing our jobs. It just kind of highlights the fact that we need to be more inclusive with our staff in terms of engaging with students. But when you look at the numbers that we're sharing, a vast majority of our teaching and support staff are engaging, and administrative staff.
This question also had an open-ended component so that staff members could share alternate ways that they communicate with, which was really helpful because we were able to see how many are communicating by phone calls, text, email outside of these two apps.
And that's going to be huge, especially when we start looking at the next slide and learning what our teachers did use. Because some did make Zoom outreaches and some were using various instructional tools that we didn't mention here, but we're going to gather all that information and then talk about what that looks like from a curriculum and instructional standpoint. But we did ask, we want to know, Google Classroom seems to be a safe place where we can begin to build our classroom instruction. There's also at the high school level, I know the CCP uses Canvas. So we have some options there, but we have to be able to, for this sake, we looked at where most people could land, and that was on the Google Classroom. So we wanted to know, how familiar, how proficient, who can teach others how to use it, what percentage of our staff, and to say that we have roughly 10% of our staff that feel as though they have the ability to teach how to use Google Classroom, I feel really good about that. That is a great place to start. And when we were having these conversations, we had a teacher union representation at the table, and there were concerns that we were on a continuum of abilities, but now we can support each other, and we know that we can do that now based upon the data. And then the other three pieces are further instructional tools that when you talk about blended learning that are popular. So we wanted to see our staff's familiarity with this. And once again, going back to how we started, no shame, no blame. There are a lot of tools that people can use. We were looking at some free tools, to be honest, and what that looks like, but also quality and seeing what our familiarity are with those. Just to kind of, and the nature of being researchers, which as educators we are, if I didn't know about these, guess what I'm doing right now? I'm getting myself prepared and I'm looking, but then we're gonna land on some areas, a few areas that we can train our staff on universally and get really good at a few good things.
And a lot of people, and originally people were looking at that data and they were disappointed because of the high numbers of people who never heard of these. And I got to be honest, I look at it just the opposite. We have experts in every one of those. We have people who can teach others how to use it. What we have to do is just create a forum where that can happen. So these things aren't difficult to learn, but when you have your peers who are willing to teach you, life gets a whole lot easier. And again, they'll be learning online. So it's one of those things where you have no idea how to do it, and then after playing with it a couple times, you're pretty good at it because most of these things aren't that complicated. But for a lot of our staff, regardless of what your responsibility is, you just didn't have the need for it. I don't know what a couple of those are because I wasn't expected to use them. And even though I pride myself on all those things, it was just not what I do.
And that conversation happened a lot with the leadership team. They were very interested to see what the trend data would be for these tools and adding on additional tools, because in education, we all know it's not just about teaching children, it's us as adults also learning and being vulnerable and sharing with one another and building that environment of safety where we can practice some new things and figure it out.
So in building an online or blended approach, we're talking about asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. Screencastify, can I capture my screen? Can I do video? Flipgrid, can students demonstrate their learning in different ways? Nearpod, can I assess students along the way? All practices that we know are important, but how does that translate to a online learning platform? We need to start thinking in that perspective, and that's what this question was to generate information on. And this just in from Bill Oley. This slide also helps us determine our PD needs, and we've kind of talked about that a little bit. But he wanted us to emphasize the fact that our staff said that there was a large number that said, yeah, I'm willing to learn instructional technology approaches at a high clip. So we are gearing up. There are some curricular decisions that we need to make, and we're going to do that together to find out what the best method is. So the next series of questions were around collaboration during the remote learning experience. We want to know, how did that work? How often? And what was the quality of that? Because do we need to adjust? So here, collaboration frequency. And once again, this is throughout the entire organization. You can see 33.6% of our staff said they collaborated multiple times a week, 32% weekly, 15% monthly, and there was 19%, so they did not collaborate at all during this time away. And we have to figure out why and how we can do that better. And then the collaboration quality, very similar. 22% said there was no collaboration. 10% said there was collaboration, but it was not helpful. 37.8% said it was a little helpful, and roughly 30% said it was very helpful. So when we start thinking about the practices that we're doing right now, and we're talking about today, these are not just COVID or remote learning practices that we need to put into place. But when we do, and remember, we have a responsibility of building a strategic plan for 3 to 5 years down the road as well. This information will help feed that as we build those plans as well. So Erin, this is your slide. You want to speak to this one?
Need a sip of water? So again, the input was being taken in not only through, like check a box, but also by asking for qualitative information, open-ended questions. And some of the themes that really resonated and kept coming to the top included, teachers want to be back in school if we can do it correctly, if we can ensure that there are masks and social distancing and assurances regarding sanitization, that there need to be clear protocols and PD to ease concerns for everyone and prior to the start of school. There was a lot of concern about our littles, a lot of concern for our preschoolers, our kindergartners, not only for the fragility, but how can they keep a mask on? How can we ensure social distancing? And there's this tension. I mean, it just breaks your heart when you read a lot of these open-ended responses where everybody wants to be there. They want to be the best, educator and support staff that they can possibly be. But oh my gosh, my family, and oh my goodness, my own safety. There were questions about the best ways to address, okay, so what if kids don't follow the rules? Are we gonna, kick them out of school? What if it's the adults? How do we build supportive practices around that? How do I choose, this one also will break your heart, how do I choose between being a parent and being an employee? If my child's schedule is different from the schedule of the school that I'm working at, how do I choose where to put my body at that time? How do you possibly make that prioritization other than your family comes first, right? Concerns about sanitizing and distancing. Those concerns increased with the level of exposure to a staff grouping and how often they're with children. There were many staff members willing and able to teach the instructional technology, as Michael went over already. And then we kept asking ourselves, did staff answer these questions based upon the current lack of a plan, the fact that we haven't been able to share, okay, here's exactly what we're going to do, or was it because they just honestly have these concerns and haven't been able to work them through their minds yet? So we want to know what this data will look like if we resurvey after sharing what the plan is. How will people's realities and feelings change about coming back to school in the fall?
And we're going to have an opportunity. So when we go through the next couple of slides, there will be opportunity to re-engage staff with knowing that in the next 2 weeks, a lot can change
and families
from a health standpoint, and we'll be further along and communicating more information. So what does that actually look like? What do our next steps look like so we can move forward?
Everybody say "aw" to that picture.
Nope.
Oh.
No,
Nobody did.
So there's a few things that we need to do. We need to analyze the family survey. And then with that analysis, there's a side-by-side comparison to match staff needs, family needs, and then go back and look at the restart document. Are our concerns aligned with some of those questions that are posed? Do we have specific questions that we as a community need to address? So we are going to analyze those family survey results. And as I said, that closes next week. But while we're waiting for that window to close, we're still working. And what that means is we're forming work groups. So that's step 6 of our 14 step piece. And with these work groups, we've taken all of those categories in the ODE Restart Guide, and we've broken them into departments, for lack of a better term. So operations, human resources, curriculum and instruction, student and family engagement, communication, extracurriculars, and technology. Now, the idea of building a plan, the more people that you can have actually touching the plan and being a part of the development of the plan, the more likely you're to dot your I's and cross your T's, because there's a lot of different perspectives. So we will be forming work groups. That outreach is occurring as we speak, and we are going to identify those tasks relative to the Restart Guide. Those concerns that are coming out in both of the surveys. Each group might have a different layers of questions that they need to respond to and put in part of the plan. But the idea is to recruit a very talented team around skills, and not just positions, but skills. So can you think big picture? Do you have certain health strengths, collaboration? We definitely need people that can get into a room and agree to disagree at some points and keep pushing thinking. So we don't need all like-minded either. So and as a group, we talked about all the skills. We need task managers to make sure that we are keeping a point to timeline, right? But we also need creative, innovative thinkers that can think outside the box, because we've never done this before. So, and then we also need people that can reach out to others, right? And say, hey, did we miss something? And bring that back to the group so that we can address those needs, knowing that things are going to change. So flexibility, of course, is a skill that we need in there as well. So when we start talking about implementation team, all of those traits come into play. And so we're going to take every work group is going to meet weekly to update the others on where we are. There's going to be some natural overlap so that we can coordinate. And the project managers, the active step managers, will be guiding that collaboration. Then as we move further and further along, the communication team will take all of this information and make sure that we have a real readable, understandable, comprehensive plan to put together all of these parts. Then the fun part comes into play, though. And Aaron, if you could go back a couple slides, because I want to go to that process map. We partner with the health commissioner, step 8. And we get all that information and we share what our thoughts are, and we let the health partners tell us, you're off, you're on, consider these things. We create that first draft of the plan, but there will be a vetting of the plan. That's step 10. So we communicate this out, we get feedback through surveys, through whatever means we can, to find out if we hit all the marks, if there still are concerns, and what themes might come. So if there's an outlier concern, yeah, we might need to talk to that individual person, but we're looking for themes as we vet the plan. And then we create a second draft. But step 12 is where I think it's really where we start talking about various people experiencing it. So we potentially could have 3 to 4 ways of restarting, bringing people in with all the safety measures in mind and experiencing that. So pick up from a bus, riding the bus in, entering school. What does that feel like? And then talking to those focus group members afterwards and getting more information. So there's another layer of outreach there. We need people to experience the plans before putting them out there. We don't want to be, we don't want it to be live tests like when we have all our students. That's not appropriate or responsible. So we're going to have our various community members, some of you board members, hopefully, Coffin, we can experience it along with family members, maybe a small group of students, where we can try these things out and hear. Because once again, there's no blueprint for this work. We have to listen and learn and lead. So that's step 12. And then we'll be able to revise to a final draft, share that with all of our commission and our board, and then begin that phased reopening. don't know what that looks like right now. Full disclosure. And that's just where we are. But hopefully everyone can see how we're going to get there, knowing that things are going to evolve and change over these next few weeks. So if we can fast forward, Aaron, to just want to briefly, and thank you for allowing me to wax poetic a little bit right now, but briefly kind of talk about the implementation drivers of how we develop the plan and our plans moving forward. And we've talked about these things. So there's three main drivers: a leadership driver, competency drivers, and organizational drivers. Leadership driver says there's technical things that we have to have in place, and leaders have to be able to lead from a technical standpoint. Think nuts and bolts, right? Point 1 to point 15. This is how it's done. But then there's that adaptive leadership that we need as well. So our plan is built with technical and adaptivity in mind. The competency drivers, we, for the restart, are really focusing on selection of team to be a part of this design, making sure that we have all voices represented in some capacity. But then when we get further along in our plan, training. So making sure that we have a solid training plan. And then after training, coaching and support along the way. Regardless of how we open up, coaching and support is going to be a part of that. And then on the organizational driver side of things, systems intervention speaks to barriers that are outside of our local control. We have to advocate to remove those barriers as well. So if we're not getting information or we need information, how do we make sure that our local voices are heard to remove some of those barriers? We're talking about health and safety. So for the sake of this plan, but in general, systems intervention talks about barriers outside of the organization. Facilitative administration, there are barriers within the organization. People's concerns, real or not real, we have to be able to identify what those are and then plan with those in mind, and then be real intentional in making sure that the task help overcome those barriers. And then data drives what we do. And that's what we're doing right now relative to collecting the surveys, having a real clear process to analyze. We had a 5-step process to analyze our data, but that all works together in the creation of a plan. And are we doing what we said we were going to do ultimately drives that. So I just wanted to give a little bit of the philosophical background on how we're going to develop not only this plan, but our Lorain City School plan moving forward.
And for folks who would like a little light reading on that, everything that Michael has just explained, these are live links within the presentation, so you can go directly to documents that detail it. And because I saw, a couple folks taking some notes, and it's a lot. There's a lot of, yeah. So on the presentation will be on the website, and it's been emailed to folks as well. So you'll just click right on that link.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
Real quick question. Do we have an idea of when we'll have a plan, like with school starting in like a month? Knowing that I'm a planner, I have girls in 3 different schools now, think like school supplies, like to buy, and I know a lot of families like to think, I hate to go out and buy school supplies if they're not going to need all the school supplies they're going to need, or uniforms, or do we have a idea of a date?
I think an ambitious but realistic timeline to have most of these steps done is by the end of the month. So once we understand, or at least conceptually speaking, what our plan is, our final draft, then we can identify what the needs are, and then create a timeline that we say, okay, here's what we need. And then it's going to take us 3 weeks to get ready, or 3 months to get ready, whatever that happens to be. And then we'll create our plan from there. But we'll have I think, a very good idea by the end of July.
Yeah, that was even sitting here, the messages I'm getting are like, what's the timeline? What's the frame? Because the teacher's stress from what I'm getting, even before this meeting, was the uncertainty is killing people. It's driving, because teachers are creatures of habit, and the school year starts next month, and they're like, I don't know what I'm planning for. And that really puts them in a weird place. And even like you said, parents are the same thing, asking me what's going to look like. And so I think having that end of the month, I think kind of maybe will give people a little sense of, okay, because I think when people see that, the messages that I've gotten are like, oh my God, they're on step 5 and they still
And it's
have
gonna
to
take a long
get to
time.
step
Yeah,
14.
we should be on step 9 or 10 by the end of the week. So
Okay.
I mean, some of these things go pretty quick.
Okay.
Gathering the information from data or from the surveys takes a little longer, but it won't, we should be ready by the end of the month in terms of having a pretty good idea, conceptually speaking, without all the details. But to your point, Steve, it's not just, when are we coming back to school? But if we look at our staff, 50% based on the CDC requirements, according to them, they're not coming back. So if we're doing remote learning versus traditional learning, how do we divvy that up? So
You have to
what are you
have
teaching?
teachers.
What are you teaching next year? And one of the advantages, I guess, of what some of the leeway that ODE gave us, there's a law was passed that allows teachers to teach anything next year. If you're a licensed teacher, you're licensed to teach anything.
Yeah.
So we obviously have to execute common sense with that as well and put people in positions they're comfortable with. But next year is going to be a year of being creative.
Yeah, that came up in a Zoom meeting I was in this morning. We're talking about what we're teaching, and obviously being CCP, I'm kind of a little more locked into, but other people are like, well, I don't know what I'm teaching. And that's
Yeah.
like resources, planning, what does it look like? And
But what we won't do, and understanding that different people need different amount of times to process that, what we're not going to do is say, okay, here's our plan. By the way, show up tomorrow.
Right.
What we're trying to do too, and we talked about the fact that about 90% of our staff, and we believe that 90% or more of our staff that actually shows up in the buildings is engaged. They responded to a survey in the middle of July. So I think, again, we need follow-up information. So we're going to continue to engage. But we're also trying to take advantage of reacting to what they say they need.
Right.
So there's absolutely no reason we can't start now growing the number of people who can use Google Classroom and all the other.
now, if I may ask a question, are we, and this question has come up to me too, are we married to the start date? Was it August 20th? Is that something that we're trying to still meet that target date? Or is it something that because of maybe professional development, are we going to start as normal, but maybe bring the kids back if we have them coming back at a later date? I'm just kind of, that's asked me all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question. We are allowed because we're approved to educate remotely. And some districts have already said first semester remote. And I'm not there yet. We're not there yet.
Right.
And are we comfortable saying, let's delay the start of school? Yeah, but let's find out why first. I think if the needs justify to do this the right way, then we have to delay school by whatever, then let's have that conversation. But for us, we're talking about safety and we're talking about keeping people safe. And there are several things to consider. And right now the focus is on keeping children safe from COVID. And the reality is young kids don't get it. And when they do, it almost never is it to the extreme. There's a lot more research. I did a doctor's appointment this morning and got into it with my doctor. And whatever side of the argument somebody takes, I just take the opposite side to kind of beat it up and learn more. And it was talking about there's almost zero. The number is almost zero for younger children getting COVID. And they're also not a vector to infect others. So the younger kids can't take it home and give it to their parents or grandparents.
The NBC News did a story last night and they had 5 pediatricians across the country, not political in any way. And they all said exactly what you said.
Yeah.
The younger kids, it's really not that big of an issue. And they all 5 of them said they would recommend, they're sending their kids back to school.
And they say they have to go back.
As long as they have the safety measures in place and things are done properly, that would be, we lost my idea.
But again, we look at safety. There's other things that we need to keep our students safe from. A lot of our students need mental health supports. They need trauma supports from abuse and alcoholism, incarceration, all these different issues that kids come to school for. So if they're not at home and not being socialized normally, which is also a huge issue, so there's all these safety factors that we have to somehow balance. And to Michael's point, we have no idea what we're doing. I mean, we're trying to take all the information, listen to experts, do the best we can. But the risk of bringing students back is the fact that we need teachers to teach them, and they are at higher risk. And it's not so much the teachers even being with the students, especially when you're talking younger students, it's the teachers being around other teachers and other staff members and other adults that things get scary. And we have to do this in a way that is safe for our adults. And to your question about when do we come back, it's not only making sure that we can and we can stagger it. Maybe the people who start remotely start whatever date and then traditional start, we can be creative. But we have to make sure that people are ready for whatever it is. And if it's going to be remote learning, our folks need to be trained on some of those platforms. If it's traditional learning, our folks need to be trained on how to be safe. So we won't rush into it. But again, the goal is to have school in some traditional sense as well as the remote piece.
Some districts are wanting to start immediately to get ahead of maybe the second phase that might come in late fall, early winter. So you're juggling all these things at the same time.
And again, no matter what we do, we'll be wrong because we can't, there's no
perfect
way to
answer.
keep everybody safe. When you factor in especially all the definitions of,
No matter what
we're
we
trying to define,
decide,
keep a kid
there's
safe
going to
from.
be parents that are going to not agree with because it doesn't hit their schedule or
Yep.
what they want. So
And that's another piece. And I think Aaron made the point that, you talk about you have to make the decision to write an article that can either be a parent or you can have a job, but you can't do both anymore. And if our families aren't working, they're not eating, they're not paying their rent, there are other safety measures that come into play. Healthcare, there's all kinds of things that, all these dominoes that are affected by a lot of the services that we provide, and we have to figure out a way to do it safely.
well, I appreciate the reaching out to the community like the
Yeah.
team is doing and trying to get those answers. And the fact that there's a deadline, I think or an ending point.
Conceptual deadline, yeah,
Yes,
by the
I
end of the
think
month,
that-
and
right,
if it's
that-
delayed by a few days,
Right.
it is, but
Yeah, I think.
everybody will know it
idea.
every
fear
step
that
of
I
the way
was getting
exactly.
is, oh my God, this is going to go into middle of August and then there's going to be a week until school starts and then it's going to be, oh my God.
By the way, there's an email coming on Sunday to tell you what you're doing and where at.
Right.
A question, based on some of the medical attentions receiving, are they differentiating between ages of kids and impact? So, we're talking about elementary, middle school, high school. Seems like high school kids are more like adults
Yes.
than they are like
Yes.
kids. So from the pediatrician perspective.
What's the age, where you draw the line? Don't know that one yet. But again, when you also look at bringing students in traditionally, and this is not any place we are, but a conversation we've had, and we have to make sure we're providing an education and providing services and meeting the needs of all of our students, pre-K-12. But we also recognize the fact that some students are more vulnerable than other students. So they have additional needs, again, we need to be responsive to. And at least in one of the criteria that popped out when we met as a team was age. A 17-year-old kid has different needs than a 7-year-old kid or a 6-year-old kid, especially when you're looking at whether or not, the caregivers can go off and go to work and leave those children home alone. So these are all factors we're trying to put into play and consider the overall health of a student, not just as it relates to COVID, because there are balancing acts that we have to.
It's like building the airplane as you're flying it.
Exactly. And we don't have the map yet. We don't have the directions yet. We're still waiting for the
And there's no
instructions
manual to
on how to
fly
build
this plane.
an airplane. And we know today was long and we appreciate your patience. We want to make sure that there's hopefully at least some comfort in the fact that we're following a process. And wherever the data takes us, it'll take us. And the rules could all change tomorrow, but the process won't. We're going to continue following this piece. The implementation piece that Michael talked about a little bit is huge because it's, to Steve's point, it's pretty easy. Okay, here's our plan. It's an email, hit send and take a step back. And no, there's a lot of things that go into making sure that things are being done the right way and that we're providing the right supports and we continue to listen and engage throughout. So it's a crazy time and it's a scary time. But again, I think we are focused on the right things and we fully acknowledge we don't know all the answers, but we are blessed to be surrounded by people like Dave Colville and Mercy Hospital and folks who are willing to share the most. And again, Mercy has had people at the table during these conversations. So we've got current information and people working with us.
So of course, my phone is blowing up over here from every
We knew we
mom
were
and
doing
dad
it.
in town. So the first question that I got is, you guys hadn't been into your meeting a good 20 minutes and you couldn't keep your mask on. So how do we expect a teacher to do that for an entire day and students to do that for an entire day? And I think that's a valid point.
It's a great question. I tried to address that before actually, as soon as I took my mask off.
Sure, and I heard
Hey,
what you said.
let me state it again, because it's something I think that bears stating over and over and over again. There are, my mask is a barrier, right? If I got this on, I have a barrier. If Yvonne has hers on, she has a barrier. That's 2 barriers. If there's 6 feet between us, that's a barrier. So there's 3 barriers.
Sure.
We need 1 barrier between us at all times. So when I took my mask off, there is still a barrier between me and everybody else. So students in classrooms, that's one thing we have to consider. If students aren't going to wear their mask, which according to our health commissioner, they don't have to the whole time, as long as they're 6 feet apart. Now, if you're 3 feet apart or 2 feet apart, you're wearing a mask all day. And again, to your point, how realistic is that? So there are a number of things we need to consider, but again, we'll err on the side of safety. And we did break it down, and Jeff Hawks got a document from an architect that showed the best way to design classrooms while putting students' desks 6 feet apart and having a teacher space that's also 6 feet apart from the students. And we could fit, based on the size of our classrooms, between 9 and 11 students in each classroom. So if we go by reducing size, again, to build in a barrier, we're good. But when the students go in the hallway, they go to the restroom, or there's a class change, you put your mask on. So there's still a barrier between. He also talked about the bus, which was a big concern. And until Friday when he shared it, we were all rather baffled. If you don't have your mask on, it's one student for every other bus seat, which is completely impractical to transport 11 students on a bus. But with masks on, students can sit next to students because, again, they've got that barrier. And when they're next to each other and each is wearing a mask, they have two barriers. So again, the goal is to make sure that we have barriers on.
I guess I have a question. Are we going to provide masks? I mean, I know a lot of teachers have to provide the supplies, pencils, everything. Kids come to school with nothing. Are we going to provide the masks, numerous masks? I mean, because if they
Yes.
lose them, forget them, or whatnot, are we going to provide
The short answer
them?
is yes.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure either. I've read different things. And according to our health commissioner, he said he wears his mask every day and he washes it once a week. So we need to make sure that we're keeping them clean, and there are ways that we can go about doing that as a school district.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, for our staff and our students.
So for the more traditional parents and a more traditional life, once upon a time, now is the time we would be doing our school shopping. So the question still comes up, or if we come back, are we using uniforms? Are we not using uniforms? I know there's the urgent things and there's important things, and I'm not sure where that falls on this pendulum, but that's a question that has people concerned. What do they do about their clothes for their kids coming into the school year?
And that has not been decided. We have a survey going out again for our parents, the next round of information, and I anticipate that being on there. What I hear with the uniforms is, do I spend money on something I don't need to spend money on?
Right.
Especially during a time when, unemployment is so high.
Yes.
That is, we're definitely listening to that and hearing that. And from what I also from what I understand, it wasn't enforced specifically last year as it had been in the past. So a lot fewer parents have uniforms for their children. So it's something else to factor.
Correct. And then I'm gonna float right back into a House Bill 70 question. So the three districts, I'm assuming, still have those Thursday calls with the state of Ohio?
Yes.
So with us not having state testing for this year and next year, how is House Bill 70 affecting those three districts? And have they had that discussion, or are we just kind of stuck here in the mud? Or have they decided, because we can't progress out if there's no testing? So where are we in that whole process, and how should we approach that?
I think there's still debate as to whether or not we can progress out if there is testing. I mean, it's not, even if we get great grades, there's nothing that says you're out. But they were allowed to be let out. But I've
That's a
heard
good
nothing
point.
in terms of how this is impacting us.
Right. And I know those three districts has a special kind of thing going on with all the crazy that's going on around us. We're still kind of imprisoned in this thing called House Bill 70. And at some point, it becomes my job to lead that fight against how do we get back out of House Bill 70 with all the other things that we have to do to keep it going, to run our district and open up and educate our kids. So I was just curious if they've approached.
I've heard nothing else.
Okay.
And I welcome you to join the meetings with us. That way you get the same information I get.
That would be great. I'd love to do that.
Of course.
I would love to do that. Thank you for that. Anyone else have any?
Yeah, as far as technology goes, and we know that we're going to have to, we know we're going to be in some kind of a blended environment. What does that look like in terms of acquiring the devices for our teachers, for students? Because I think that timeline is going to impact start dates also, getting the technology, getting it formatted, training.
And unless I'm confused on the dates, I'll look over. I believe, and our teachers don't have laptops at this time, but I believe they're getting theirs formatted and ready to use July 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. And as far as students are concerned, we don't have a system to deliver yet, but as I understand it, we have devices for every student in grades, a window-based device for every student in grades K through 12. Pre-K 1, we have a device for every other student. So if we choose to get devices for the younger children, we still have some to order. Part of our survey is reaching out to parents because obviously the devices don't mean much without internet access. So we're trying to find out who does and who does not have access. And again, our job will be also to find access for them. And again, the devices, I think, go in so many ways. We're talking about, again, serving a child through serving their family. And I think some of the things that people overlook, it's tough to find a job when you don't have a computer. It's easier to find a job when you have access to computer and internet. It's also easier to get unemployment when you have access to a device and internet. So these devices are intended for children to use for learning, but they're also intended for families to use to meet their needs.
Anyone
Could you
else?
clarify that again about the mask? How frequently are we going to do that? Are we going to do it for the students and the staff? And how frequently are we going to do that? Once a week? If they lose it more than once, are they going to be responsible for it,
Okay,
sanitizing it?
in terms of the masks and losing them, I think there are ways we can keep them. And again, just some ideas to throw out, that when students get off the bus, they hand them in, or when they leave school, they hand them in. If that's the case, obviously it's a different student with a different mask every day, so they need to be washed daily. According to the health commissioner, he washes his once a week, and he says that's plenty.
So
But
the board,
if it's his the entire time, yes, but
so
not
the
to share.
board is going to sanitize the mask?
They need to be washed, and we have washing machines in each school. So I would think I don't have a plan yet, but I don't anticipate it being an obstacle to get the masks washed and back to our children. And I think we're more likely to keep them, masks, if we keep them and wash them as opposed to sending them home.
Okay. And the hand sanitizer?
We have to, by law, as I understand it, have hand sanitizer in every room. Not just every classroom, every room in the district.
And we're going to have some type of frequency?
To wash hands?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not just the hand sanitizer has to be there, but soap and water is much better than hand sanitizer, especially when it comes to this virus. So not only do we have to allow children the opportunity to wash their hands, we have to teach them how to wash their hands. And adults, we have to teach our adults how to wash their hands. I think we have been allowed to be lazy in washing our hands for the last however long, and we can't be lazy anymore. So there is a proper way to wash your hands thoroughly and appropriately, and we need to educate everyone on what that looks like.
And we will have some type of system for them to have lunch.
Yes. Lunch is another struggle because you can't wear a mask while you eat and drink.
Mm-hmm.
What the health commissioner has recommended up to this point, and again, this will change and we'll get better at as we talk about it, as we learn more, but assigned seats in classrooms, assigned seats on the bus, and assigned seats at lunch. That way, if you're at a group of 8 students at lunch, and one of you is test positive, and that's the only group you sat with, then we know exactly who to send home to check for symptoms. If they bounce around at lunch, then everybody has to go home. So there's some ways to be safe about that. But again, there's no way, whether children and adults are in school or they're not in school, that we can protect them from COVID. But what we can do is take steps to decrease the likelihood that a lot of people are impacted by one person testing positive.
Anything further? You guys all clear? All hearts clear?
Yeah, there's one more piece that I think would help with some, just like people have been able to watch this and they can see a process and they can see the thoughtfulness. Lots of discussion around the pre-activity before school starts, primarily around sports. And there's lots going on. And we've had some good fortune to have some conversations with yourself, the athletic director, of course, the health district, everyone's been involved in this. So just kind of an update on exactly the protocols that we are following. I think we wanted also to see if there's an opportunity for some kind of a concise document, be it via video or narratively written, that's provided to every athlete and their family, even to the point where these different protocols they're supposed to observe, that they've stated that they will follow those. And the same thing with coaches. And then so they're aware of what the consequences are for not following them, the potential health risk, but also so that everyone knows that we have a very protective environment and that some of these things are non-negotiable. We know that people kind of do their typical behavior and we're creatures of habit. So I think making sure that there's a certain fidelity to all of these is important, and it's not about trusting, it's about verifying.
Understood.
I would rather not have to say I trust a coach or don't trust a coach, but sign this saying that you were going to do this, and if you don't do this, this is the consequence of what happens. So, I mean, I think, so if you could just share with us kind of what's going on with, because we have, what, soccer, football, volleyball, basketball, cross country, maybe?
Yep. And in terms of specific protocols, I can't do it. And they've changed daily. They've changed weekly. As we learn more, we update things and we try to get better. But I think to the point of your question, and by the way, to everybody who's watching me and those of you who don't know me, I take notes on my iPad and my to-do list is on my phone. So when you ask me to add you to the meeting and talking about, get this document, I'm just taking notes so I don't forget to do it. But I think your point is valid. It's not just what are the protocols, but how do I know as a parent what they are and as a student what they are? And how do we know that we're monitoring our coaches and the process that we're following appropriately? Because there's so much that we don't know that we should be able to share what we do. So I'll make sure that we get that communicated.
The other area I'm concerned about is IEPs, because that's an area that's going to be very fluid, because there are a lot of areas that need to be attended to that are going to be seriously impacted, that have to be attended to because it is a state and it is just a need that has
Just state
to
and
be.
federal laws protect that, yes. The question is, when students have disabilities, there's a document that speaks to the services that we're required to provide based on the individual needs of that student. And the question is, and the challenge is, how do you do that when the rule changed?
Yes.
But we still have a legal obligation to meet those needs. So during the school year, I'm told, obviously wasn't here, that we were being very cognizant of and reactionary and appropriately served our students. When we come back in the fall, regardless of what coming back looks like, we have to make sure we do the same. And sometimes it requires meeting again to set up something different because the world is different. For example, if the parent refuses to send the child for reasons that are completely legitimate, or at least we respect that they're just not willing to send their child back yet, we have to come up with new ways to provide those services.
And so we've shared in some of our private conversations where we are on some of these issues and how we want to approach it as a district. So I'm going to make a sports comment first. And my sports comment is some of our neighboring districts have already canceled fall sports. We've not made that decision, and most of them, I guess, have not made the decision to do that. Parents and the community are concerned on, in their logical mind, how can you have contact sports and keep social distancing and keep everybody safe? It's not rational. So that's the sports analogy that I would use on how do we make it a decision to play when our neighboring districts decide they're not going to. That's one. And two, I just want all of our parents, our students, and our staff to know that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they're protected and safe equally starting off, and everything else starts from there. We're going to do all that we can, and I won't settle for anybody being in a non-safe position as best we can. I know that's your heart, but we just need to make sure that they understand that clearly, that we're not going to compromise on our safety to the best of our ability.
I agree completely. And the conversations that we had, and I think we both firmly believe that before COVID, right, we wanted to create opportunities for our kids to be in our schools and off our streets because it's better for them to be here than to be out there. So that's also a safety piece we have to factor in. If there aren't, pick an extracurricular activity, but if they don't exist, what are our children doing? So we're also looking at ways to increase opportunities. And right now, regardless of the motivation, sports are the ones that are coming back first because there's a governing body that has put a lot of time, effort, and money into trying to determine how to do it safely. But there are other extracurricular activities that we need to think about doing because, again, our children need to be in our schools and off our streets, but they need to be in our schools in a way that's safe. And to your point about our neighboring school districts, right now we're following the advice of our health commissioner and the Ohio Department of Health, and they believe there are ways to do it safely or safer. And from now on there, but I don't disagree with what you're saying.
I think it's also, go ahead, Bill, I'm sorry.
I wanted to make a comment as to where we might be in a better position than most, and that is we have new schools in Lorain City Schools, okay, which means that we have the best in technology and air handlers. And I don't know if you know it, but in these buildings, there's like 14, just this building alone, there's 14 to 18 air handlers that have HEPA filters in it that cleans 99 point some percent of the air. And the air that you breathe in this building is turned over every so often. You're not breathing the same air, okay? There's outside air coming in and the air's going out. So there's such a thing as a sick building. We don't have sick buildings. We have state-of-the-art buildings, you know, with probably the best filtering systems that you can have right now, other than being in a hospital where they add UV lights to kill bacteria and things like that.
Yeah,
So-
but they're all wearing heavily protective gear.
So we're as far as when you're talking about, Mark, starting out, okay, we have really good facilities right now. Right now, we're in a good place, as long as we keep them clean, you know, and like I say, we start out safe. Okay, that's the end of my comment.
And I think people should know that we've had some really intense conversations where we're not sitting in the room singing Kumbaya, but really challenging the process, challenging motivations. It's difficult to say why someone does something, but we focus on the what we're doing and what the potential consequences are. And so it's not easy. And there's always someone who's bringing a different perspective. There's the health as it relates to COVID, but then there's the social emotional health. There's all kinds of other health factors that are pre-existing conditions and have to be addressed. And it's not easy. And but again, we will challenge ourselves because there's some folks, again, that we know there are alternate motivations. And there are a lot of political pieces, and we kind of get played in this. And there's decisions being made at the state level, even in terms of changing the colors. It impacts us. We see the colors change to red, we react. We don't know that it was a oversight or anything else. We're gonna if that color changes, then our community sees a color change and they expect a behavior change. And when they see a color change and no behavior change, that appears to be reckless. And sometimes all you need is the appearance of recklessness, and you get a lot of damage done. So people need to, the other question is, where can people call with questions about any of this?
And that would be the helpline that Aaron shared, and it's 440-830-4357. Is that right? And can you share the Spanish hotline again for our Spanish-speaking families?
The Linnea Espanol number is 440-830-4880.
Yeah, I knew that.
So we encourage folks, if you have questions, concerns, suggestions, comments, don't worry about how it's expressed. I think it's important that our staff gets this information, these questions, and then they can respond to them appropriately. And there's no dumb question. There's no bad question. There are questions and concerns, and I think we need to hear them. That'll also give us somewhat of an assessment of where people are in their perspectives and how much educating do we need to do. There's a lot of confusion, to wear the mask or not wear the mask, kind of.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but the reality is there's not enough accurate information. There's so many things we just don't know. That are unknown, I should say. Not just not just us, but.
Is there anything else on your list of the CEO's report? Because we just got right over into the surveys and
No, that was the report.
that was very
Double check
important and very informative. And
Double
thank
check.
you all for doing a great job with that and giving us that
I
information.
have one more question. I think this is a little early, but I'll say it. I think the teachers would like to know if they get ill, they wanted to know if their sick leave is covered.
And there are some legal pieces on that too. So I don't want to speak to that, but teachers and all staff have sick leave and sick days. And I believe we also have a sick leave bank here, if memory serves. So there's extra protections for those folks, but there's also some COVID protections that exist that I don't feel comfortable speaking to off the top of my head, but I can get that
Okay.
information for you.
That's fair. Did you have anything further from your
I do
CEO's
not,
report?
Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Well, again, I'd just like to reiterate that it means a lot when we can come and have these candid conversations so our community can hear the questions because they may be thinking them and want to know if we're just missing all that. So I appreciate you coming here and
Of
having
course,
this open
appreciate the invitation,
conversation.
and this is something we should get used to, right?
Yeah, as this continues to evolve, you all stay tuned and we will make sure that we answer all the questions to our ability. New business, is there anything else in new business?
I have
Anybody
a
have
question
anything?
about our future meetings. So this one was our first live meeting.
Yeah, you better talk in the mic so you can hear you.
Oh, sorry. So this was our first live meeting,
Correct.
but it wasn't with public necessarily. So just kind of what are the ideas from the chair going forward on how we're going to meet, limited space? Are we going to keep doing this and then social media and include the community in that regard?
Yeah,
Have you-
so I think in the beginning, the governor had said that, we weren't meeting in groups larger than 10 or 12, 10, I believe, leading up to the end of June. Then everything changed, then we went red. So nobody really got any further direction beyond that. Other than the end of June, we were able to go back into our regular meeting. So we will monitor that and call it on a play-by-play because as long as we're in the red, I don't think, things are worse now than they were 2 months ago. But we are back into having our meetings, gathering our meetings, and we will never keep the public away from our meetings.
So then might it be a good idea if we just plan to continue our Zoom, even though we're going to be meeting like this?
Correct.
Platforms are in place. And then, so there's no question of whether there was a real access for the public
Yes,
in a live format. I'm guessing, is this Facebook Live?
this is Facebook Live and YouTube.
So that's on a delay also, right?
No, they're on right now.
No, I mean, I'm saying like a 15 second, 20 second. I'm saying it because when you get the comments, sometimes people will make a comment, but you've already passed where they're commenting because they're saying what you said 15 seconds ago. Because I found out with church,
Okay.
when you're responding to the comments, it already happened.
Next meeting date's the 27th.
Yes.
So yeah, so it'd be good. That way folks know what that Zoom call number is and they can log in. And then that way, when we have to go into executive session, at least for us, Tia and the other folks who manage the meetings are fully prepared to process that.
Okay.
So we're still meeting that sunshine law requirement, just like we were doing when we were just doing the Zoom.
Yep. So I did just get another text asking for those who submitted questions. And I said at the top of the meeting that we will answer all those questions and have them posted online onto our website. I'm not sure how long it will take, but I guess if you would give us a few days to get those questions posted, we will get those up as fast as we can. Did you
It
have
was a
comment?
pretty thick stack of questions, but we'll put those under the board section of the website. And for the questions that, we'll also have an FAQ in a different area. We'll make sure that they're all over the website, so they're easily found.
Got it. Okay. So our next meeting will be scheduled on July 27th, probably right here in this room at 5 o'clock. Is there any further comments? Anything from the ADC?
No, I think I've talked enough for today.
Okay, very good. So at this point, we need a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Second.
Roll call.
Okay. Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Nazario?
Yes.
Mr. Ballard?
Yes,
Mr. Sturgill, yes. Mr. Williams?
Yes.
this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.